This KFAN podcast is sponsored by Builders and Remodelers, exclusive Twin Cities provider of Elements Windows. Get the highest quality windows at unmatchable value. Visit buildersandremodelers.com for more details. Just in case you missed it, it's the top 5 sports talkers of the day. Now, it's time for Dan Barrero's Top 5 at 5. Brought to you by Gutter Helmet of Minnesota. Never clean your gutters again. Learn more at gutterhelmetmn.com.
All right, it is Top 5 at 5 time. Chuck Foreman will join in about 25 minutes.
What was your favorite Tom Thibodeau in New York moment? After their deepest playoff run in 25 years, the Eastern Conference Finals, I believe back-to-back 50-win seasons, the Knicks, with President Leon Rose, informed Tibbs he is done. Just 3 days after the Eastern Conference Finals loss, I just watched a Shams report on SportsCenter. Shams broke it. Why wouldn't he? And some of the words that he used in terms of the next coach: flexibility, more leniency when it comes to the bench. Those were themes that came from Shams, which means they probably came from the Knicks. The things that always somehow follow Tom Thibodeau after he gets fired are following him here. Your thoughts?
I'm going to give you a quick list here. 2019-20 was the season before Tibbs took over.
Okay.
The Knicks that season finished in 12th place in the Atlantic, 12th place, I guess, in the conference, 5th in the Atlantic Division, with a record of 21-45.
Not very good. COVID-shortened season, too. They could have lost a lot more games.
That's also true. They hired Tibbs for 2020-21. They finished 41-31. It's not a bad increase. That's 20 more victories. The next year, they go back a little bit. Fall back to 37-45 in Tibbs' second year. In the third year, they go 47-35. Then 50-32. And then this past year, 51-31. And as you say, make the Final Four for the first time in 25 years. The moral of the story is, and this didn't just happen to Tibbs. It happens to many coaches. Is you become a victim of your own success. In other words, if, as odd as it sounds, if the Knicks would have continued to flounder, then there probably wouldn't have been a lot of discussion of, well, we've got to get somebody else. He's taken us so far, but now we got to get another voice in there. But what he does is he whets your appetite, lifting them up to a place, like I said, they haven't been in almost 3 decades, and suddenly it's not enough. Suddenly it's like, well, this was good for what it was, but by God, there's got to be more there. But the only reason you're even tantalized by the possibility of there being more there is he got you there. That's always the irony of any coach who helps a program reinvent itself and get refreshed. And then they reach a point where it's like, well, that was good, but now we think there's a bench issue or you're not maximizing here or there, etc. So I am fairly I'm never going to be gobsmacked, actually, when Tibbs is fired, because it's always Tibbs' fault, as we've established in Minnesota. But I thought, at the very least, he was going to be safe going into next season. That you can't, it's hard in good conscience, a year where, again, you have your best season in 30 years, you say, whatever your misgivings are, that you're not going to bring him back. And then maybe the old short leash thing, where you say, if we start weirdly, then we have a reason to do something. So I am very surprised, even with all of the blowback in New York, related to Tibbs, related to Karl Anthony Towns. It's gotten especially irrational on him, I would say. But I think some of the Tibbs discussion is also irrational. They defeated the defending champions. Now, Boston had injury issues. I get that. But they were already in trouble before, what's-his-name went down. Jason Tatum.
Yeah. They won the first 2 games in Boston. Correct.
And they're not, the Celtics are not the same team as they were a year ago, but they were the defending champions. So now, again, you had the home court advantage against the Pacers and you blew it. We get all of that. But the speculation in New York is They've already got the guy in mind. Obviously, Malone's name's going to come up immediately, but I don't even know. There are people in New York I respect who don't really think they've already done that. That it's more they just felt like they had to make this sort of change. We went through it here. Tibbs is not the perfect coach. I'm not here to say that he is the perfect coach, but I do think certain, I hate to use the word, narratives get established about a coach, and people keep coming back to them over and over again. And is it because they're true, or is it because, no, that's just been what people have thought forever?
Right.
The greatest example being the question of whether he kills players. And somebody did a deep dive finally on this, just within the last year, that said, at best, it's inconclusive. But it's certainly not as slam-dunkish automatic. Now, you could say he had more of a bench. The only reason it didn't look like he had a bench is because he didn't use the bench. Maybe. I don't know. I guess that's possible. But Finchie didn't use his bench either. Right? You could argue that Finch should have played at least one or one and a half more players, but he still doesn't seem to be on the hot seat. So New York's a different, animal.
Yep.
There's no question about that. But I have a hard time, like I said, doing this with a straight face when you put it into context. But again, coaches like Tibbs become victims of their own success.
It's crazy.
It really is crazy how that works. You'd almost be better off going slower, meandering, although you might have gotten fired for that too. But it's the old thing of, well, this looks pretty good. And they go, well, who made it good? Well, maybe Tibbs. But he can't possibly be the guy to take it to the next level.
Well, that's what I always worry about, people that want to take it to the next level because it sounds good.
Yes.
And sometimes it works out. And if in your gut you just don't feel like you got the right coach, you probably have to do something. But people take a lot of steps backwards trying to find that elusive
Very
next
true.
level, especially when you think about all the variables that go in. They could have easily been up. They should have been up 1-0 in the Eastern Conference Finals.
That's true.
If not for the crazy heat check Neesmith game where Halliburton, ties it at the buzzer with that crazy shot that went as high as the Empire State Building.
5 straight threes, right? In that game.
And dropped
Neesmith.
down. Yeah, like those are the margins we're talking about here. I'm very fascinated to see where it goes. Also because, Brunson's dad is on the staff with Tibbs, even coming back here, right? Rick was on the Wolves staff, at least for a time.
That's
Brunson.
correct. That's correct.
And he's there. Like, new guy would probably be smart to keep him, I would imagine.
That's an interesting question.
If that's what Jalen wants.
Yeah, right.
So it will be very, very interesting to see where they go. Where did I want to go?
By the
NBA
way,
Finals?
I want to confirm what we talked about briefly yesterday. In the Eastern Conference Finals, Karl Anthony Towns averaged 24.8 points, shot 50% from the floor, 36.7% from three, was averaged 8 free throws a game, 13.2 rebounds, 1.8 assists. And people are talking about him like he was unplayable. Like, we got to find somebody who can, because that's one of the items that's been speculated on. See if the next coach can get more out of Karl Anthony Towns. You're not going to make a great defensive play. I don't care who's the greatest defensive coach ever. You're not going to get greatness defensively out of Karl Anthony Towns. He's not capable of it.
Tom Thibodeau might be the best defensive coach ever.
That's true.
Right? He was, and that's not hyperbolic. He was the defensive coach on all those Celtics teams with KG. He came here with a great defensive acumen, right? Tibbs is a great defensive mind, we thought.
Yeah, now they became a more offensive coach this year, in part because that's what Cat is when you make that deal. This is really unfair, though. Somebody is saying that where did it go? At least I won't have to see that ridiculous comb over anymore. Can't people let Tibbs live his own life regarding his hair?
Try to be. He's not going to. Not everyone can be Pat Riley.
Exactly.
They can't all be Finchie with the flow.
No, it's unbelievable. P.S. He writes, "I'm bald," so he's trying to say, "Hey, look, I'm not saying I'm any better, but at least I don't try."
He thinks
the comb over should just go. Just go shave.
He thinks, he should join your squad and just give it up and just say, "I'm not going to do this anymore." Just let Tibbs live his own life. It is weird.
He's never going to be let to live his own life.
I know.
Ever.
It's weird that a guy who's been an NBA coach for so long, I feel like he's been wronged at every stop somehow. And again, I know he's not perfect.
No.
But it's very funny. So we'll see where he ends up. Real quick, because we want to break the stand schedule for Chuck Foreman. Lynx are back in action tonight against Phoenix. You can hear it right here on The Fan. And the Twins beat the A's, as they should, 10-4 last night. Byron Buxton with a career-high 5 runs batted in, tied his career-high 2-run double. Drove in 2 more with a bases-loaded single, had a sac fly as well. So the Twins are now 32-27.
So many good texts have poured in to the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line at 64686. We're going to review some of the best and then prepare for Chuck Foreman with some of his memories playing alongside the late, great Jim Marshall. Stay tuned.
Get ready to experience the magic of James Taylor live in concert. Don't miss out on seeing the legendary singer-songwriter along with his all-star band when they take the stage at the X, June 17th. Tickets are still available. You can get all the details at KFAN.com, keyword calendar.
Clayton from Rochester, is Luigi going to take Lavelle's underwear advice so he can get his rugs home? I was going to ask, but then that would have been taking too long to explain to Louie the underwear thing, and I'm not even sure it would have translated.
No, I've never thrown away underwear.
My guess is he doesn't.
No.
He's too old school for that.
Probably.
Right? That's too wasteful. Is it not?
Cesar Maniago did that in Calgary in 1977 and never gave him, they never wanted to do it again.
I mean,
he'd have a story about it.
Plus, he probably has silk underwear.
Yeah, I was going to say, Louis' underwear is too expensive to throw away.
Yeah.
You know he'd have a story, though, of a teammate and their underwear. And somebody, J.P. Parisi had to borrow Tom Reed's or something. He'd have a story.
There's no question about that. What was I going to ask you? There's already, huge list being compiled of potential head coaching replacements for Tibbs in New York. And there is a local angle on the list, I think put together by Athletic guy who covers the Knicks, that does include Wolves assistant Micah Nori.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean he's going to get it, although there's the obvious link. Good vibe with Cat.
That's true.
Worked closely with Cat. Worked on a lot of offensive things with Cat. Maybe he can make a good defensive player out of Cat.
New York would like the humor, I think.
Yeah, actually, I think it would play well.
He'd wear well anywhere.
If
you got to win.
Yeah, no, the other if is, can he continue to be the same guy as head coach? Because some guys can, but for some guys, everything changes, and they lose the ability to reveal as much of their personality as Micah Nori clearly does as an assistant coach. But you're in a completely different role.
Yeah.
It's your deal now.
Right.
And it is New York, just to be thrown into the mix. Real quick, before I get
Somebody had Stephen A. Smith as a plus 6,000. Right after Micah Nori with the odds.
Well, that would be an interesting jump where he goes from the broadcast booth to being Knicks head coach to being president of the United States. Right?
What's a tougher job, Knicks or president?
It's not even close. It's the Knicks head coach.
I think it is, yeah. The country's been more successful in the last 25 years, I think, regardless of who's in charge, than the Knicks.
Tibbs' fault. Kendrick Perkins is in the meat grinder. Did you hear about this? Well, I guess I should narrow it down because there's like one.
He's on
one
every
week.
day.
Yeah. So somebody found comments he made. I want to say it was like 4 or 5 games into the 2024-25 regular season.
Okay.
And it was literally the season was in single digits. I don't know the exact number, but I want to say it was like 4 or 5. And he declared that the Indiana Pacers would not make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. And who's their star point guard?
Tyrese Halliburton.
Tyrese Halliburton, it doesn't look to him like he's taken his job seriously enough.
Wow.
Now, they started the season 10-15.
They weren't very good.
Which is, but this was not even, this was 5 games in. And
Perk goes
he
with
makes
his gut.
these bold proclamations that are fine, but I think you have to kind of acknowledge them at some point, don't you? Say, by the way, I'm the doofus who said they were done before they were done.
Well, usually they do a pretty good job of that on the ESPN morning stuff.
Do they?
They'll cycle things back.
They'll cycle them back? Okay.
And they get people's reaction to what did you think here? I think typically they do a pretty good job. I haven't been watching lately,
right?
Because the Wolves are out and I'm in my morning period. So
if I texted Tibbs, you think he'd respond?
Yes, eventually.
Yeah, it might take a month.
He's been on how many times since he was fired from here?
That's
2 or 3?
He has been on a few times. That's right.
We had him on to talk playoffs. We've had him on to talk other things.
Yeah. I'll try it just to say, I mean, look, he'll be fine, right? He's made good money over the course of his career. I think he'll be okay, but it can never be fun to be dismissed.
Well, it's got to be weird to be fired after literally breaking a 3 decades old curse almost of taking a team to the Western Conference Finals, and the way that they did it. And he had the same thing. You know, you heard Tim Conley yesterday go, well, we've done to Finchie the last 2 years. I mean, shows you how good he is. We're just throwing a new team at him and saying, go coach him every single year, right? That's what Conley said?
Yes.
Well, Tibbs had the same thing. He lost Randall. He lost Dante. Now, they're not as big a piece as losing Carl for the Wolves, but you still have to reconfigure things on the fly a little bit. It was the same timing for them, and I don't think they had any issues assimilating everybody in. They were a top 4 seed in the East the whole year, right?
Correct.
They came here and blew the doors off of the Wolves in December. So that was pretty early in the season. They didn't have the same acclimation issues.
The be careful what you wish for mentality on Tibbs is exactly why Minnesota deserves 8 consecutive years of Finch being outcoached with 0 finals appearances. Whew. Wow. That's heavy. I'm not here to tell you that coaches should never be replaced, but I am here to tell you that the mentality that is suggested there is just as irrational as sticking with a coach stubbornly for too long. Because this is sort of you got to change, you got to get him out of here. There's a middle ground in there somewhere, but it's rarely struck. That middle ground is rarely reached. There is really something to, I think, the adrenaline, the notion that there's an adrenaline rush with a change. When you make a change, there should be a very specific reason why you do.
Right.
And I don't think we're there on Finchie, which is not the same thing as saying you can't be critical of some aspects of his coaching and challenge him to do some things better. But I like the way Conley put it yesterday. If you make as seismic a change 2 consecutive seasons as Conley did by making first the Gobert deal and then the Cat deal to New York, then you could say, well, you're handing talent to the coach, but you're also handling fresh challenges that really don't allow this thing to sort of develop over a longer period of time, right? I think frankly, I think we need more general managers who are that self-aware as opposed to, I gave him all the tools. He didn't do anything with it. Well, you gave him 5 minutes. How about you give him maybe 2 straight seasons to come back with the same people? So again, I know there are people. I mean, there are people in our audience who want every coach and manager fired every year. They just do, and it's fun. It doesn't cost you anything, and you get your emotions out. But I think you have to be a little bit more precise. I would say. Didn't know Gaardsy did impressions. That was a great Lou. That is your best impression.
Think so?
Yeah, easily. And what I think that hit me was your Lou impression is not always as good as it was today. Today, I felt like you brought it. Yeah, it was, and I don't know if it was the timing, whatever, but it was like I thought this was one of your better ones, right? So you just
got to have a couple obscure names ready to go.
That's true. That's a key to it.
That he brings up. He brings up people that we've heard of, never heard of, and they all. To me, they're just funny.
That's very, very true, Davey. Here's another.
I used to do a lot more. I don't do the impressions as much anymore. No,
you should. Yeah, it's something worth reinvesting in, I think, for sure. Let's take the bottom of the hour pause, and then we'll have plenty of time to ode Vikings great Jim Marshall. Vikings announcing earlier today that he had died at the age of 87 years old. A great friend of this show, Chuck Foreman, has talked Jim Marshall stories for years and years and years. We're going to give him another opportunity to do that once again in his own reaction and his own deep thoughts regarding, I know, was a very respected and loved teammate, Jim Marshall. Vikings running back great Chuck Foreman is next here in the Fan. Times we've had Chuck Foreman on this program, but it feels like almost every time, at one point or another, we have chatted about Jim Marshall, his former teammate, with a training camp story, gatekeeper story, or even a story about his football prowess. And sadly, on this occasion, we're going to do it with Chuck Foreman. With the news breaking earlier today that Jim Marshall is no longer with us. He's died at the age of 87 years old. Chuck is kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. And first, Chuck, our thoughts are with, obviously, the Marshall family, but with you, too, because I know how much you loved him. I know how much he meant to you. So, when your peers, when it starts happening with your peers, it can't be easy. So our thoughts are with you as well today, Chuck.
Well, I greatly appreciate it. Jim was a unique individual, football-wise and otherwise. He was really special. And, I think with all of us that he has touched, he I'm almost lost for words, but he's just that special of a human being. When you meet Jim Marshall, you consider yourself lucky to have met one of the finer people you'll ever meet in your life.
Do you have any recollections of when you first, joined the club and if something stuck out before you knew him, as you got to know him? I mean, is there anything that stuck out in particular that you can talk to us about today?
Well, first thing, the agent I had was a guy by the name of John Wooten.
Mm-hmm.
Jim played with him with the Cleveland Browns and Jim Brown.
Okay.
And so before I even got here, he talked to me about Jim Marshall. And he told me you're about to meet one of the most unique people you ever meet in your life. And he was not wrong at all. Jim was committed, relentless, smart, just thoughtful. I mean, everything you would want a person to be in your life, he was. He was the greatest leader I think you'll ever meet. He was a leader of men. He was a guy that, if you were in trouble, if you like for instance, when he was on that, was it a snowmobile deal?
Yes, right.
Just about everybody almost died. He let everybody out, but that's the kind of guy you want. He was relentless in the way he lived, and he's the kind of guy that you would follow anywhere because that he wouldn't leave without you. And so that's I think the highest compliment I can pay Jim. He was just a unique, special. And when I can guarantee you, when that mold has been broken, never to be recast.
You played in an era in which a lot of players played through everything in a way that is, right. I don't even think people could comprehend in 2025. Right. And yet, it appears even within that group, Marshall was on another level in terms of obviously, play 282 straight games, a streak like we've never seen before. So I'm presuming you're around him sometimes in the training room, locker room, whatever. What did you observe in that regard? I mean, was it as simple as he's just saying, I'm not going to miss the game? I mean, how was it that even then, when a lot of people played through a lot of stuff, he was, above and beyond that, given, as we said, he never missed a ball game?
Well, mentally, I don't know how he did it, but I think that with his ability to take his mind to wherever space that was, that could get into a place where he could compete regardless of the injuries he had. I didn't have it. I don't know if I met anybody who has had it, but I just remember, I don't know what game it was, but he was in the hospital.
Yep.
And we didn't think he was going to play. Next thing you know, the ambulance shows up, drops him off, and he's playing football. And not only playing, but playing at a real high level. I'm just saying, Jim Marshall was unique in every way that you can speak of. Now, you got to remember, I was 11 years old when Jim first came into the league.
Good point.
I've read about him, and I watched him like everybody else. And when I got here and met him, and I had the privilege of having John Wooten as my agent to explain to me who he was, what kind of man he was. When I met him, I always thought he was a John before I even met him, because I'm saying to myself, there's no way anybody, human, can have those kind of qualities to be able to do what he's doing. And when I met him and I was able to be around him, he was relentless in practice. He had a motor that just didn't stop. He was bright, smart, everything you can think of. He was a great, great athlete. He could have played any sport I think he wanted to play, because when he was at Ohio State, he was one of their best. He left there early.
Right.
But I can't really explain it to you. The only thing I know that those of us who had the privilege to experience being a teammate of Jim Marshall was unique, special in every way you can think of. He was, in my opinion, I don't know that there will ever be a leader like that, or has been since he left the Vikings, or any other sport for that matter. I can't speak for everybody, but I'm talking about my own personal opinions. Jim was, wow. Bud didn't have to worry about anything.
That's it. Yep.
Jim had it covered. Jim had it covered.
In your mind, Chuck, it's a question that's been asked for decades, maybe centuries. Are football leaders born, or are they made?
I think you got some leadership qualities within you in the beginning. Mm-hmm. I think Jim. I remember Jim's father. His father had a presence about him that was, Jim got whatever Mr. Marshall had. Jim's father had. He passed it on to his son, because I remember meeting him, and he was. You got that aura from him also, but Jim. I think he's a natural born leader. And he expected a lot of himself. He expected a lot of you. And he not only expected from you, he showed you why he expected, because he didn't ask you to do anything he couldn't do.
Was he intimidating at all to play with? I feel like, Marshall would have the kind of stare that would get a teammate's attention. What do you remember about that?
The only thing I know is if you were looking in Jim Marshall's eyes playing against him, you knew you were in for a long day. Because I keep using the word relentless. And I'm hoping I'm using the right word, because he came at you regardless. He had no stop. His motor was unlike anything I've ever seen. I mean, and then when he'd be done playing the game, he'd be ready to go do something else at 150%. So, those guys, people like him, and I don't know that there is another Jim Marshall or wherever it be. I know in Minnesota, they got that statue of him over there.
Yep.
And I don't know if anybody else has ever been here that deserves to be in there other than Jim Marshall. And we've had a lot of great players here. Don't miss, and I'm not disrespecting any.
I know.
But what Jim Marshall brought to the Minnesota Vikings, nobody has brought since. Brought some great players, no question about it. And we've had some great ones, no question, a bunch of us. But Jim Marshall, no, there's only one of him.
Give me your favorite Jim Marshall-related Gage Hall, the man with the keys story.
I can't tell you those stories.
Come on, man. The statute of limitations is run out. Nobody can get in trouble now. But Bud can't discipline you at this point, Chuck.
Oh, he can't. But I remember one thing that I remember. That sign that says what you see here, what you do here, what you say here stays here for life.
Okay. That's
I got to honor the code, man.
Yeah.
The only thing I can tell you is the top floor of Gage Hall in training camp, Friday evening, night, whatever you want to call it was on. That's all I can tell you.
Well, we don't need names. You don't have to give us names.
I'm not giving you names. I'm just telling you, it was the best. It was like the best club you could go to.
and I'm guessing it all ran through Jim.
And it all ran through Jim. He had keys to everything. I remember. Well, anyway, you got locked out. Mm-hmm. You didn't worry about it. You just called Jim. Hey, Jim, let me in. You know, because you had because like Stubby Easton, you know, the equipment guy,
yes.
His room was right there by the door.
Yes.
But Stubby only had one leg. Now, you could do one or two things. You try to get the keys from him. If you couldn't find the keys, all you do is take his leg and hide it. And then you could get in.
Man.
You know, because he couldn't catch it.
Yeah.
You open the door, leave the door open. Somebody go open the door. You can sneak in. He could hear you coming, but he couldn't get to you because his leg was down the hall somewhere. So you made it not get, and then you didn't get fined for being out past curfew. Of course, Bud probably knew anyway, but
exactly.
You know.
Yeah, that's it. Did you ever get in trouble with Jim?
Man, you'd be a fool to do that. Yeah, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying Jim Marshall, when I say Jim was unique and relentless, I'm saying I wouldn't want to be in a street fight with him either.
Right.
As a, you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
That would be like, no, man, I'm not doing that. And I'm telling you, he would be, you know what? He went every time. Because he also knew all that kung fu karate crap too.
Yes. So
you know, he knew. I'm telling you, he had every gadget you could have. He was probably one of the smartest people you'll ever meet. He just lived life to the fullest. You know, there was nothing. I mean, I'm just telling you, he was. There's no more Jim. Hey, that's it. There's only one of him, and it's all special.
You mentioned the snowmobile deal. We talked about a couple other. You know, he had all kinds of afflictions he dealt with. Wasn't there a hang glider? Didn't he have a hang glider accident too?
Yeah. Yeah, and the bottom line is, the place where he was trying to take off from at Jefferson High School.
Right.
If you went over there, and I'm like, what was he thinking? It was one of them light gliders where, you know, you had a motor on it.
Right.
And he was trying to take off from that high school field, you know, and plus, you know, he was 250 pounds, so I don't know if it was a light thing.
Yeah.
From what I understood, the motor, you know, didn't have enough power to get that lift. It lifted him all right, but not high enough. And that's when he had the accident.
Yeah. So did he have a good amount of daredevil in him?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I'd follow Jim pretty much I mean, if I had to survive and stuff like that.
Sure.
But there's a limit that where I would go.
Yes.
Because he had that, because he could, he would, I would never doubt that he wouldn't survive anything he tried.
Right.
And I think all of us that know him know that. But I just wouldn't have the nerve to do it, I guess. That's what I could say about it. The guy was one of the, I mean, like I told you, like I said before, definitely when they made him, they threw the darn mold away, because you can't tell me there's another one of him anywhere.
Chuck, did you guys ever talk about, or did you ever try talking to him about his infamous, you know, grabs the fumble and runs the wrong way? And I think that was in '64, so that was obviously before your time. Did you guys ever talk about that?
That was a no-no. I mean, I wasn't going to talk to him about it. You going to talk to him? He just, no, you might, because like, I would be afraid that I would catch him in a bad day.
Yeah, right.
If I said something like that, you know, that might not be good. Because, you know, I'm telling you, Jim Marshall was a lot of things, but you didn't mess with him.
Yeah.
And he'd fight with you to the death, no question about it. But, he was just, let me just put it to you, Jim lived 87 years, and he lived 87 great years. Now, that's all I can say. He lived a great life. There's nothing that he wanted to do he didn't try. He's anybody that came through here that met him will tell you, Jim Marshall. When you talk about Viking,
yeah,
and I don't care who the heck came through here, me, anybody else, there's only one Minnesota Viking that's legendary. Only one, and that's Jim Marshall.
Very well said. That's why I started the show with is, there have been some great players, as you know, in this franchise, but he seemed to fit the mythology of it, right? I mean, he seemed to sort of be the heart and soul of the whole operation.
So you see that image of a Viking, the big white guy with the big white beard and the real long hair.
Yes.
Okay. Well, all that's in place, but put a black face in there, and you got Jim Marshall.
That's it. 100%.
Everything you thought of a Viking, you put his face in there, and it's perfect.
The mentality.
He'll fight till the death.
Yeah.
He was just tough and tough and tough. That's what it was.
Well, and then, like you said, when you got stories like getting caught in a blizzard, right? I mean, it's just and finding his way out of that, it all fits. It's almost like a Hollywood story, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know what? There should be a movie made about this guy. If there's ever going to be a bestseller, that would be a great sports legend story. Jim Marshall.
No question. It's
the greatest of all, right?
It's such a rich story. And a lot of people don't even know the half of it, as you said. Do you think it was easy for Bud to spot the leadership qualities in him? Did you ever talk to Bud about that?
No, I never really had long conversations with Bud, but I know Bud knew and identified who his leader was.
Yep.
And I knew he loved Jim Marshall like one of his own brothers or sisters or whatever it was, but he knew Jim was special, and, that's all I can say. Bud knew what he was doing when he made him captain. And when they say cap, there's only one cap of the Minnesota Vikings, then and now, and that's Jim Marshall.
By the way, I think he was captain. Was it 14 years? I don't remember. I think it's about that. Whatever it was for a long time. So was it is it something you guys voted on every year, or was it Bud made the decision and he just stuck with it, or how did it work with captains back in those days? What do you remember?
I think when they name a captain on teams, and then you might change every year or stuff like that. But with our team and the Minnesota Vikings of my era, it was automatic who the captain was, because there was nobody on our team that had the special gifts that Jim Marshall had as a leader. He was, he showed you what it took to be the best. He was bright, smart. He was all those things. He was a gift to the Minnesota Viking franchise. And like I said, they got that statue up over there, and that's the guy that should be there, because he is the all-time Viking. As a person, as a football player, as a man, as everything you can think of. I think he meets and goes beyond all those qualifications.
What was he like with fans? You and I have talked, I mentioned it earlier in the show, that when you guys played, I felt like there was, not as big a space between, and as big a buffer between fans and players, that you guys talked about sometimes after games, in the Met parking lot, talking to people, eating with them, etc. Right. What was he like in those days with fans?
He was very engaging to everybody. He never turned down anybody for an autograph or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
When I say he was a professional, I mean professional about every aspect of being a celebrity or football player or whatever. if you just watched how he handled himself, you'd do quite well. And so I said, I was behind him,
Sure. Yep.
I was, like I said, I was watching him long before I was anywhere near being in a league of any kind. So to get there, to not only meet him and to be his teammate, and even though there was a big age difference, well, like 15, 16 years or something like that, but it was still, just a privilege to have been a part of the Vikings and knowing Jim Marshall like I knew him. I mean, every now and then there's a bump in the road, but
Yep, sure.
it always gets smoothed over and it goes. But he was, a great. Like I said, he was. When you say Vikings, just put Jim Marshall up there. He is the ultimate Viking, in my opinion. And we had a lot of great players come through here, but there's none like Jim Marshall.
I'm glad. I'm hoping a lot of younger Vikings fans are listening to this because, it's hard when you're younger because you haven't grown up with the same players and you haven't maybe seen the same film or whatever the case may be. You've heard about that era. But I think it's important for them to hear this stuff. I really do. If they care about history and this is how the story kind of gets brought back to life, right? Is folks like you. And Gaardsy and I talked about this separately when the story broke that Jim had passed away. And it was like we read each other's mind. We texted back and forth, and the name that we wanted was you. You're the guy. You're the guy that we wanted more than anybody else to have on because I thought you were going to bring this to life like no one else can.
Well, I don't know about all that. I'm just speaking truth about one of the finest people you would have ever met, and I know the last couple of years has been difficult for him and his family. But Jim endured. He lived a great life. There's nothing that he wanted to do that he didn't do, and he certainly left us with a lot of great memories and of what a true leader is, how great a man he was, and, just the privilege to be able to call him a teammate, to have that experience, because the Vikings of my time, in my era, in my opinion, until there's a team that comes through here and gets to, a Super Bowl just to start.
Yep.
Because I went to 3, they played in 4. The Viking era is the era of Jim Marshall, Carl Elliott, Gary Larson, Alan Page, Mick Tinglehall, Fran Tar. I can go ahead. Ryan, I can go on down the line. Until that happens, the greatest of the Vikings is there in that era, and I wish them luck, and I hope they get there. But Jim's still sitting on top. He's still the guy, and so his teammates are standing here with him and saying, well, come on and join us. It's a great place to be.
We're losing too many, Chuck.
Yeah, well, it's like I'm going to my class reunion in Maryland this week, and I wasn't going to go. But then I sat down, I thought about what year it was and how many years it's been since I've been there. And then I'm looking at my age, and luckily I'm getting around pretty good, and I'm saying, I better go.
Yeah.
Because I gotta enjoy life while you can. And those are some of the things you gotta do. So I'm gonna make that trip back to my hometown and enjoy my former, high school mates and just see how many of us are left.
Outstanding decision. Yeah.
It's a long time.
It is a long time. Great.
So that's the way I'm living it.
Yep.
And, And I'm just saying we lost a great Viking, but a great guy, and he's definitely going to be missed by all of us.
Thanks as always for the insight, the remembrances as well, Chuck. We appreciate you more than you know, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chuck. That is Vikings running back great Chuck Foreman on the time he spent as a teammate with Jim Marshall, who the Vikings revealed earlier today has passed away at the age of 87 years old. X is reminding us that Karl Anthony Towns has now gotten Tibbs fired twice.
Yeah.
He might not want to raise his hand and say he had anything to do with it. I don't know. But that is the case, right? I wonder who it's going to be next in New York. I don't think it's going to be Malone. If they mean what they say about, the bench and new school and all this stuff, then he doesn't fit.
No, he doesn't.
So what about your guy?
Jay Wright?
Yeah, that's going to be the obvious name. You think this might be the one kind of job where he's willing to jump in the deep end?
It's possible. Did you see Seth Davis's tweet about that?
No.
I'm paraphrasing, but he said something along the lines of, having spent the last 3 years with him working in TV, he gets no inclination that
he wants to
he's
get
even
back.
thinking about it. That he has a better chance of being the next Knicks coach than Jay Wright does. And he said, the only difference between Jay and me is if they called, I would take it. He goes, he doesn't think Jay would take it. But you never know. I mean,
no, and we always assume that because coaches coach that they always want to jump in. But some of them get away from it enough. Now, I don't know him right at all. But when I watch him.
I wish I did.
Yeah. I mean, we've always had a crush on him.
Totally.
I've never.
Better hair than Finchy.
I don't get the sense when I'm watching him that he's itching, that he's one of those guys who's absolutely going to be defined by whether he gets back in.
I think that's exactly right.
So, who knows? I mean, I guess anything is possible, but I think it's unlikely. Did you see our guy, remember Jeff Teague?
Yes.
Former Timberwolf?
Yes.
He's been going on. Now, I don't know if this was an old bit of sound that's resurfacing because of the Tibbs announcement, or, and if you're just joining and haven't heard, the Knicks fired Tom Thibodeau today. Remarkably enough, despite the fact that he got them back to the conference finals for the first time in 25 years. And here's the other piece of this that shouldn't be forgotten. He had New York excited about the Knicks again.
Right.
In a way that they've just not been for 30 years. But I digress. I thought Teagsy had something about the Tibbs doesn't really coach. So, everybody's got a podcast and everybody's got an opinion, and that's fine.
Well, and every time we've played a Jeff Teague soundbite, including the infamous Jimmy Butler practice one.
Yes.
Like, I feel like there's never been a less self-aware person ever that the stories he's telling don't make him look good in the slightest. You know what I mean? Like, Teague tells these stories.
Yeah, he does tend to, yes.
And then you go,
yeah.
Do you realize you look stupid in this one? And that includes the infamous practice one,
right,
where he's looking around.
Wasn't there one where he basically said he didn't want to come here, but his agent basically said, well, you're going to have to because that's all you got. Because that's your best job.
That's your best offer. Yeah. That's exactly right. And
frankly, there were times when he played like it when he was here.
A lot.
I didn't. I never got any. I never had any Teague hysteria.
And that's the danger of Tibbs' personnel guy, right? Because obviously his personnel guy here, that was his biggest flaw, more so than whether he played starters 42 minutes a night, that he thought he could get buckets to work out, which obviously he couldn't. I remember him at the State Fair, still very naively talking about the winning's going to change everything. Once you get here and you win again, coming off the first year.
Yeah.
And then, a month later, the thing's completely blown up.
Well, if you recall, and this is always the sad plight of struggling franchises, is that when Tibbs is available, you have no equity to say to him, we're interested in you, Tibbs. We're also interested in someone else to run the front office.
Correct.
And
at that point,
that point, and Tibbs can say, well, no, you think I'm going to want to mess with you guys there if I'm not in charge of the whole thing? I've got all the power. You've got none because you have no equity. That's always the disadvantage that bad franchises are in. So they end up further hastening their own demise, likely, because then, well, it's Tibbs. We got it. He's worth getting. Everybody's saying we should hire him. We got to give him everything because that's really the only way that we can get him. If you're a more established franchise, you don't have to usually go that route. You can say, well, obviously what the Knicks did, we'll hire you to be the coach. You want to coach? Fine, but that's it. That's all you're going to do. And unfortunately here, I think it was more than he could, he bit off more than he could chew. Now, maybe next time he'd even be better in the front office. I don't know.
It's possible.
There's no question that was the issue here. I'll also say in his defense here, I would have taken the bet on Butler, too, at the time.
For sure.
So
he snapped a 14-year playoff
exactly.
streak.
So, I look back on it and say it didn't work. But most people are going to take that bet and say, we can get Butler. Yeah, we're going to do it. And we're going to find a way to, because at that point, he didn't have a history of him, changing teams every 3 or 4 years, right? It was just the Bulls.
Yeah.
Right? That was the only team he'd been on at that point.
Yeah, we were the second team.
So, you say you're going to, so as a personnel move, that wasn't the most horrible move. It looked horrible in retrospect because you obviously read Butler wrong and you made some assumptions and it ended up biting you in the butt. And then from that point, everything indeed unraveled. Let's come back with a bit of sound from the last time we had Bud Grant in our studio. And the subject, sure enough, ended up being Jim Marshall. We'll play that back for you in our final segment of the show. Remind you also of what we have coming up on the midweek broadcast.
Dan.
Farm Aid 40 is coming to Minneapolis. You can join Willie Nelson, Neil Young, Dave Matthews, our guys trampled by turtles, and more. Saturday, September 20th, Huntington Bank Stadium. Celebrate 40 years of music, food, and family farming. Enter for your chance to win a pair of tickets now at our contest page, KFAN.com. Keyword contest. The show wrap is brought to you by American Pressure, commercial grade pressure washer since 1975.
It's the Bumper to Bumper show wrap.
Bud Grant joined us in studio. It ended up being, about 2 or 3 months before he passed away? Last time we've had several great interviews with Bud over the years. This was the last one. And
December of 2022.
December of 2022. And we covered a lot of ground on that occasion. There was always like 25 other questions I ended up with, but you did what you could do. And part of the discussion that certainly fits today's conversation was related to Jim Marshall. And we thought you might like to listen to that. We played it really early in the show, but for those heading home now, here's about a 3-minute discussion with the Vikings head coach. You've always said over the years, I'm not going to say, best player, favorite player, because that's unfair to too many players, and you coached so many great ones. But maybe you can answer this question. Is there a player who comes to mind, if I say to you, who hated losing more than any player you coached?
Mikan.
How about football? That you coached?
Well, you blindsided me with that. I had to think about it. A lot of great competitors, and to reach the level that we're talking about,
right?
Most of those guys, answered the bell. Some didn't, and some reach a certain level during the game, and that's the best they can do. But Jim Marshall comes to mind. I talk about George Mikan. That's basketball. Talk about football, Jim Marshall. And that when I walked into the Vikings, I walked around and not walked around, but I was with the players for a short period of time, and I'd say something, and everybody glance over this guy over here. Everybody's looking at Jim Marshall. Well, if Jim Marshall, would shift his eyes, and I could tell if Jim Marshall bought it, they all bought it. So he was our head cow. I mean, you ever know what a bell cow is?
Bell cow, absolutely, yeah.
A bell cow. He was our bell cow. So anytime I might say something, they'd all look at Jim Marshall. If Jim Marshall, he wouldn't have to nod, but he'd just make some kind of a gesture. if Jim Marshall bought it, they all bought it.
I think that's what a lot of great coaches, that's what they figure out is it can't all be what the coach says. You have to have some lieutenants who are the ones who convey and carry your message. That's really how you become successful. Is that correct?
Well, you're absolutely right. And Jim Marshall was, our bell cow. I figured that out. I figured it out the first preseason we played in Tulsa. We're playing Philadelphia, which was my former team,
right?
And we're talking before the game, and I'm talking about what I expect from them, deportment-wise, not necessarily technical-wise, but their deportment on the field and substitutions and a lot of stuff. And everything I'd say, they'd all glance over to Jim Marshall.
Yeah.
So I figured out he's the guy I should be addressing everything I do to Jim Marshall because he's our bell cow.
Some guys, and what makes a bell cow? Personality?
Well, I think competitiveness. Jim Marshall was he falls in the George Viking category. Mm-hmm. Very, very competitive and never got tired. Always played at full speed. I don't care what the score of the game was. He pressed the button. You're on full speed right now. That was Jim Marshall. He never took a play off, and he'd play many times. We'd play on Sunday, meet on Monday, and Jim Marshall couldn't walk. He had a bad ankle, all swollen up. I said, well, I might be out. By Wednesday, he was full speed. And by Friday, he was ready to go. On Saturday and Sunday, he played.
There it is. Nicely conveyed by the coach who gave that player, one could say, more power than any other player that he ever coached. And he obviously coached some great ones. We're reminded that December 9, 1979, Kevin Gallagher has a rest in peace Jim Marshall tweet in which he's got video of Marshall's final home game. In his 20th and final NFL season, he played his final game at the Met in Bloomington on December 9 of 79 in what was his 300th consecutive regular and postseason and penultimate NFL game. Then an all-time NFL record for all players, still a record for defensive players. Marshall logged 1.5 sacks in a 10-3 win over Buffalo. There's some great video. I'm going to retweet the Gallagher tweet now. There's some great video, including a sign at the top of Met Stadium thanking Jim Marshall for his time as a member of the Vikings, for his performances, for his leadership, and not surprisingly, he is at one point carried off the field on the shoulders of several players as well. We have had, like I said, a lot of really good texts from old-timers who are old enough to have actually seen Marshall in person at the Met or on TV. And then there's a whole other generation who never really got a chance to see him, but who I hope today have gotten some sense of why he's going to get this sort of treatment, not just on this show, but elsewhere as well. That you can, as Chuck Foreman suggested, make the argument that he is the Vikings, no matter how long it's been since he's played. And that's, I think, why even, decades after he was a member of this team, there is such a visceral reaction pretty much across the board from so many individuals. And, there's other people. We had a great conversation with Chuck Foreman, as we've said. There are other people that we still might try to get in on this mix to get their views on him or their remembrances of him. And as I said, there's great disappointment among old-time Vikings fans that the effort late in his life to get him via one of those senior committees into the Hall of Fame did not work out. He, I think, was a semifinalist the last couple of years, but he could not be carried across the finish line. But I will say again, based on all the decades I've been in this town and have talked to people, who were with the Vikings then, and even those since, whether he's in the Hall of Fame or not, he's the guy. as he seems to convey so much about the Vikings mythology, pretty much from the start of his career to the finish. When you play in your last game as a pro, as a Minnesota Viking, and in doing so, you have literally played to that point in every game the Vikings have had as a team, I think that sort of conveys exactly why he is will always kind of be considered the heart and soul of this franchise. We appreciate the remembrances. We appreciate you listening today. Among our guests tomorrow, Kessler and Russo Radio to preview the Stanley Cup Finals. Fan on Demand is coming up next, and then the Minnesota Lynx against the Phoenix Mercury. We'll talk to you tomorrow at 3.